Manuscript found in a bottle. Chapter 1. The journey begins. Someone who doesn't have another moment to live doesn't have anything to hide. I do not have much to say about my country or my family. Many years of bad treatment have driven me away from my country, and many years spent far away from my loved ones has separated me from them. My family's wealth gave me an excellent education, and I was able to make the most of the knowledge I gained in my early studies. The study of the German writers gave me great delight. They wrote about morals. I did not enjoy their work because I admired their writings. It was because my mind allowed me to discover their false ideas. I have often been criticized for my thoughts, and I have also been criticized for my lack of imagination and the doubting nature of my opinions. These things have made me infamous. My strong interest in philosophy has influenced me in a negative way. I have the habit of referring to things that happen by using the principle of science. I have explained all this for a good reason. It is so that the story I'm about to tell should not be seen as wild words of a wild imagination. After traveling for many years, I sailed in the year 18 from the port of Jakarta. We were on a voyage to the Sunda group of islands. I went as a passenger, and just because I was bored. Our ship was beautiful. It was 400 tons, fastened with metal and built in India of hard wood. We had cotton wool, oil, rope, butter, nuts, raw sugar, and a few cases of opium on board. They did not load the ship well, and as a result, it made funny sounds. There was very little wind at the start of our journey. For many days, we waded along the rear coast of Java. The only incident that eased our dull course was the rare meeting with some of the small islands of the group to which we were bound. One evening, leaning over the rear rail, I observed a very odd, lonely cloud to the northwest. It was remarkable for its color, as well as being the first cloud we had seen since our departure from Java. I watched it carefully until the sun went down. At that moment, it spread all at once to the east and west. The cloud surrounded the horizon with a narrow strip of spray that looked like a long line of low beach. Soon after that, I noticed the dull red appearance of the moon, and also the odd character of the sea. The latter was going through a speedy change, and the water seemed more transparent than usual. I could clearly see the bottom, yet checking the depth, I found the ship in 90 feet of water. The air now became painfully hot. It was loaded with steam bursts, similar to those rising from a hot iron. As night came on, every breath of wind died away, and the sea became completely calm. The flame of a candle burned without the least motion. A long hair, held between the finger and thumb, hung without any movement. However, the captain said he could see no indication of danger, and as we were moving slowly into shore, he ordered the sails to be wound up and the anchor let go. No watchman was set, and the crew, consisting mostly of Malays, stretched themselves out upon the deck. I went below not without a full feeling of evil. Indeed, everything I saw justified me in expecting a hot, dry windstorm. I told the captain my fears, but he paid no attention to what I said. He left me without replying. My anxiety prevented me from sleeping, so at about midnight I went up upon deck. As I placed my foot upon the upper step of the ladder, I was frightened by a loud noise. It was a sound like that made by the rapid revolution of a crushing wheel. Before I could discover its meaning, I found the ship shaking to its center. In the next instant, a wild spray threw us upon our side. The spray rushed over us. It rushed in front and behind and swept the entire deck of the ship from front to rear. The extreme force of the explosion proved to be what saved us. Although the ship was completely wet and her masts had gone, after a minute she rose heavily from the sea. The ship rolled for a moment beneath the enormous pressure of the storm and finally gained her balance. Chapter 2. In the Eye of the Storm. It is impossible to say how I escaped destruction. I was very surprised by the shock of the water. When I recovered, I found myself trapped between the rear post and wheel. With great difficulty, I stood up and looked unsteadily around. I saw we were among breaking waves, enormous beyond imagination, and were surrounded by a whirlpool of steep and angry ocean. After a while, I heard the voice of an old Swedish man who had joined us at the moment of our leaving port. I called to him with all my strength, and finally he came up behind me. We soon discovered that we were the only ones who had survived the accident. All the men on deck had been swept away. The captain and mates must have died while sleeping, for their rooms were flooded with water. On our own, we could do little for the security of the ship. Our efforts to do anything were at first stopped by our expecting to go down at any moment. Our cable had, of course, split at the first breath of the storm, or we should have been instantly turned over. We ran with terrible speed before the sea, and the water broke over us. The framework of our rear end was broken badly. In almost every respect, the ship had been badly damaged. But to our extreme joy, we found the pumps were not blocked. There had also been little shifting of our load. The main force of the explosion had already blown over. We fared little danger from the violence of the wind. We were alarmed by the idea of it stopping totally. We believed that in our broken condition we would inevitably die in the huge swell, should the wind stop, but this very real fear seemed unlikely to come true soon. For 5 days and nights, during which all we had to eat was a small quantity of raw sugar, the damaged ship traveled at a rate too fast to measure before rapidly following bursts of wind. These, although they were not as violent as the first hot, dry wind, were still much worse than any storm I had met before. Our course for the first 4 days was southeast and south. I think we must have run down the coast of Australia. After 5 days, the cold became extreme. The sun rose with a sickly yellow shine and climbed very slightly above the horizon, giving out little light. There were no clouds to be seen. The wind was also increasing and blew with a broken and unsteady force. About noon, our attention was again taken by the appearance of the sun. It gave out no light. It just had a dull burning without reflecting light back. Just before sinking into the swollen sea, its central fire suddenly went out. We waited for the arrival of day 6. For me, that day has not yet arrived, and for the Swedish man, it never arrived. From then on, we were in the dark, so we could not see any object more than 20 steps from the ship. A night without end continued to cover us. We observed, too, that although the storm continued its anger, we could no longer see surf or spray. All around was horror and thick shadow and a hot, black desert. Illogical fear stole into the spirit of the old Swedish man. My own soul was wrapped up in silent wonder. We took no care of the ship, as it was useless to do so. Securing ourselves as securely as possible to what was left of the mast, we looked out bitterly into the ocean. We had no means of calculating time, nor could we guess where we were. We knew, however, that we had made it further to the south than any previous navigators. We felt great wonder at not meeting with the usual ice. Every moment looked like the last. Every steep swell hurried to overcome us. The sea was larger than anything I had imagined possible. The fact that we were not instantly buried remains a wonder. The Swedish man spoke of how light our load was and reminded me of the excellent qualities of our ship. But I could not help feeling completely without hope. I prepared myself for death, which I thought would come within an hour. With every mile the ship traveled, the swelling of the amazing Black Seas became more awful. At times we fought for breath at a height beyond the Burns. At times we became faint with the speed of the ship's fall into some hell full of water. With the air grew heavy, and no sound disturbed the sleeping of the evil sea creatures. We were at the bottom of one of these deep holes when a quick scream from the Swedish man broke anxiously upon the night. "See, see," he cried, "Dear God, see! See!" As he spoke, I became aware of a dull red light flowing down the sides of the vast gap where we lay, and throwing a broken bright light upon our deck. Casting my eyes upwards, I saw something which made my blood freeze. At a terrific height directly above us was an enormous ship. Although sitting upon the peak of a wave more than 100 times as tall as her own height, she was larger than any East Indiaman ship in existence. Her huge frame was of a deep, dirty black, without any of the usual figures of a ship. A single row of heavy guns stood out from her open ports, and showed from their polished surfaces the light of many battle lamps swinging among her ropes. What caused our greatest horror and surprise was that she survived with her sails, in the very teeth of that awful sea and that horrible storm. When we first discovered her, her front alone could be seen as she rose slowly from the dark and horrible hole beyond her. For a moment she paused upon the peak, then shook and rolled and came down. I do not know what sudden courage came over me. Rolling as far behind as I could, I waited without fear for the ruin that was to come. Our own ship was sinking with her head into the sea. The shock of the falling mass struck her in that part which was already under water. The inevitable result was to throw me, with great violence, upon the ropes of the other ship. Chapter 3. On Board the Unknown Ship. As I fell, the ship stopped and turned around, and in the confusion I was not seen by the crew. I made my way unseen to the main entrance, which was partly open, and hid myself in the hold. I am not sure why I did this, but an uneasy sense of wonder was perhaps the reason I hid from them. I did not want to trust myself with a race of people who seemed so different from me. I was also very fearful. I made a hiding place by removing several of the boards in such a manner as to create a convenient hiding place between the huge wooden posts of the ship. I had hardly completed my work when a man with a weak and unsteady step passed by my hiding place. I could not see his face, but could see his general appearance, which was of great age and sickness. He spoke to himself in a low, broken tone, some words of a language which I could not understand. He felt around in a corner among a pile of odd-looking instruments and decayed navigation charts. His manner was a wild mixture of the cross nature of second childhood and the serious manner of a god. He then went on to the deck, and I didn't see him any more. A feeling for which I have no name has taken possession of my soul. It is a feeling I cannot analyze. I cannot apply the lessons of the past, and I fear the future will offer me no key. To a mind like mine, the latter is an evil. It is a long time since I first stepped on the deck of this terrible ship. I believe the waves of my fortune are coming to a point. Here are strange men, wrapped up in thoughts of a kind which I cannot understand. Hiding has no point, for the people do not see me. Just now I passed directly before the eyes of the mate. Not long ago I ventured into the captain's own private room and took the materials with which I write. From time to time I will continue this diary. It is true that I may not be able to send it to the world, but I will try. At the last moment I will put the manuscript into a bottle and cast it into the sea. Something happened which has given me new room for thought. Are such things the operation of chance? I ventured upon deck and threw myself down without attracting any notice. I threw myself among a pile of ropes and old sails in the bottom of the boat. While I was thinking about how odd my fortune is, I painted the edges of a neatly folded sail which lay near me with a brush. The sail is now spread upon the ship. The touches of the brush are spread out into the word Discovery. I have made many observations lately about the structure of the ship, which is well armed, but not a ship of war. Her ropes, build, and general equipment are all against war. But what she is, it is impossible to say. When I look at her strange shape and odd poles, her huge size and large sails, her severely simple front and out-of-date rear end. Something familiar sometimes flashes across my mind. This feeling is mixed up with faint shadows of memory and with old foreign stories. I have been looking at the wooden posts of the ship. She is built of a material I do not know. There is an odd character about the wood which does not seem right for its purpose. It is extremely soft wood, not only soft because of its worm-eaten condition, but from the decay of age. It may perhaps seem a curious observation, but this wood has the characteristic of Spanish oak. It is like Spanish oak that was swollen by some means. A curious saying of an old weather-beaten Dutch navigator comes full upon my memory. "It is as sure," he would say, when someone doubted he was telling the truth, "as there is a sea where the ship itself will grow in size like the living body of the sailor." About an hour ago I went among a group of the crew who paid me no attention. Although I stood right among them, they seemed completely unaware of my presence. Like the man I had at first seen in the hold, they all had the marks of gray old age. Their knees shook, their shoulders were bent double, their dried-up skins shook in the wind. Their voices were also low, unsteady, and broken. Their eyes ran with water, and their gray hair flowed terribly in the storm. Spread out around them were very out-of-date mathematical instruments. Some time ago I mentioned the bending of a small sail. From that time the ship has continued her terrific course due south. Every piece of sail is packed upon her. Every moment the ship is rolling into the most awful hell of water any man could imagine. I have just left the deck, where I find it impossible to maintain a foothold, although the crew seem to experience little problem. It surprises me that our enormous size is not swallowed up at once and forever by the sea. It seems we are meant to float continually upon the edge of time without any end. It seems we will never take a final fall into the deep hole. From swells hundreds of times more amazing than any I have ever seen, we slide away with the facility of the seabird. The huge waters rear their heads above us like evil spirits of the deep, who may only make simple threats but are not allowed to destroy anything. I have started to think that our frequent escapes are due to the only natural cause which can explain such an effect. I think the ship may be under the influence of some strong current. Chapter 4. The End is in Sight. I have seen the captain face to face in his own room. As I expected, he paid me no attention. His appearance reveals nothing which suggests he is more or less than man. Despite this, I regarded him with a feeling of great respect and wonder. He is nearly my own height, about 5 feet 8 inches. His body is well made and has a solid frame. The expression on his face shows the strong, wonderful, and exciting evidence of old age. It is so complete, so extreme, that it excites a deep emotion within my spirit. His forehead, although fairly smooth, seems to bear upon it the stamp of many years. His gray hairs are records of the past, and his even grayer eyes tell of the future. The floor of his room was thickly covered with strange, iron-bound books, decaying instruments of science, and old, long-forgotten charts. His head was bowed down upon his hands. He stared with a burning and anxious eye over a paper which I took to be a commission. It bore the signature of a king. He spoke to himself, as had the first sailor whom I saw in the hold, in some low, foreign tongue. Although the speaker was close to my elbow, his voice seemed to reach me from the distance of a mile. The ship and all in it are filled with the spirit of old age. The crew slides to and from like the ghosts buried centuries ago. Their eyes have an excited and nervous look. When their fingers cross my path in the shine of the battle lamps, I feel as if I have never felt before. When I look around me, I feel ashamed of my former fears. If I shook at the explosion which we previously felt, should I not stand shocked at a war of wind and ocean? Where are the words severe storm and hot dry wind small and not effective? In the immediate area of the ship, there is the blackness of never-ending night and a confusion of water without spray. About a league on either side of us, however, may be seen, faintly and at intervals, amazing walls of ice. They reach away into the lonely sky and look like the walls of the universe. As I imagined, the ship proves to be in a current, if that name can properly be given to this flood of water. Crying and screaming past the white ice, the ship thunders on to the south with a speed like the rushing fall of water. To know the horror of my feelings is, I assume, completely impossible. I still have a need to know the mysteries of these awful regions. This feeling overcomes even my loss of hope and will let me accept the most awful aspect of death. It is obvious that we are rushing onto some exciting knowledge, some never-to-be-told secret, whose achievement is destruction. Perhaps this current leads us to the southern pole itself. This idea may seem wild, but it is very probable. The crew walk the deck with an anxious and nervous step, but on their faces sit expressions more of hope than sadness. The wind is still behind us, and as we carry a crowd of sails, the ship is sometimes lifted out of the sea. Oh, horror upon horror! The ice opens suddenly to the right and to the left. We are spinning unsteadily, in enormous circles, round and round the borders of an enormous showground. The peak of its walls is lost in the dark and the distance. Little time will be left for me to think about my fortune. The circles grow rapidly small. We are falling within the hold of the current. With shouting and a thundering of ocean and of storm, the ship is shaking. Oh God, we are going down! Note: the manuscript found in a bottle was originally published in 1831. It was not until many years later that I came to know about maps in which the ocean is represented as rushing with 4 mouths into the polar hole. All the water in the ocean is to be absorbed inside the earth. The pole itself is represented by a black rock reaching to an enormous height. The facts in the case of Mr. Valdemar. Chapter 1. On the subject of hypnotism. It is no wonder that the unusual case of Mr. Valdemar has caused much discussion. Everyone wanted to keep the case from the public until we had investigated further. Because of this, an exaggerated version made its way into society, which became the source of many unpleasant stories and great deal of doubt. I will now give you the facts, as far as I know them myself. They are as follows. For the past 3 years, I have been very interested in hypnotism. About 9 months ago, something occurred to me. I noticed that in previous experiments, no person had been hypnotized at the time of death. There were 3 things I wondered about. 1. If a patient would respond to hypnotism. 2. If the patient did, whether it would increase or decrease his condition. 3. For how long hypnotism could slow down the death process. I was curious about other points, but I was most interested in these 3, especially the third. I was looking for someone on whom I could test this and thought of Mr. Ernest Valdemar, who had lived mainly in Harlem, New York, since 1839. He was a very nervous person, which made him a good subject for the hypnotic experiment. On 2 or 3 occasions, I had put him to sleep with little difficulty. However, I had been disappointed on the other occasions because I was never able to completely put his will under my control. I always thought that my failure on these occasions was due to his poor health. A few months before I met him, his doctors had told him that he had a lung disease. He spoke calmly of his approaching death, and he did not seem to avoid it or regret it. When the idea first occurred to me, it was very natural that I should think of Mr. Valdemar. I had come to know him well, and I knew he would not object to what I wanted to do. He also had no relatives in America who would object. I spoke to him about what I wanted to do, and he seemed very excited. I was surprised because he had always allowed me to conduct my experiments on him, but he never showed any sympathy toward what I did. His disease was one in which we could calculate the exact time of death. We finally agreed that he would send for me about 24 hours before the time of his death. It is now more than 7 months since I received from Mr. Valdemar himself the note below. My dear P, you may as well come now. Dr. D and Dr. F agree that I cannot hold out beyond tomorrow midnight, and I think they have hit the time very nearly. Valdemar. I received this note within half an hour after it was written, and within 15 minutes I was in the dying man's chamber. I had not seen him for 10 days, and was shocked by his condition. His face was gray in color, and his eyes were completely dull. His wasting away was so extreme that his cheekbones had broken through his skin. His coughing was extreme, and his heartbeat was only just noticeable. Nevertheless, he retained both his mental power and a certain degree of physical strength. He spoke clearly, took some pain-killing medicine without help, and was occupied in writing notes in a pocketbook. He was supported in the bed by pillows. Dr. D and Dr. F were present. After touching Valdemar's hand, I took these gentlemen aside and obtained from them a detailed account of the patient's condition. The left lung had been for 18 months in an almost bone-like state and was useless for breathing. The upper part of the right lung was also partly, if not thoroughly, diseased. The lower region was merely a mass of diseased lumps. Both doctors believed Mr. Valdemar would die about midnight on the next day, Sunday. It was now 7 o'clock on Saturday evening. Dr. D and Dr. F said their final goodbye to Mr. Valdemar. They did not intend to return, but at my request, they agreed to check on the patient about 10 the next night. Chapter 2. The experiment begins. When the doctors had left, I spoke freely with Mr. Valdemar on the subject of his approaching death, as well as of the proposed experiment. Mr. Valdemar looked ill, but he was very much conscious. I asked him again about his willingness to participate in the proposed experiment. I wanted to make sure I was not forcing him into anything. He stated he was still willing and even anxious to go ahead, and urged me to start the experiment at once. A male and a female nurse were present, but I did not feel comfortable in conducting my experiment in the presence of people I did not know. Therefore, I waited until about 8 the next night, when Mr. L, a medical student whom I knew, arrived. Originally, I had wanted to wait for the doctors, but I decided to proceed without their presence. First, Mr. Valdemar had pleaded urgently that I get started, and second, I felt he was sinking fast and that I did not have a moment to lose. Mr. L kindly agreed to take notes during the experiment, and it is from his notes that I now relate the story. It was about 5 minutes to 8 when I took the patient's hand, and I appealed to him to state, as clearly as he could, to Mr. L whether he, Mr. Valdemar, was entirely willing that I should hypnotize him in his then condition. He replied in a weak voice, yet quite clearly, "Yes, I wish to be hypnotized," adding immediately afterwards, "I fear you have left it too long." While he spoke, I started to stroke his forehead sideways with my hand. I could see that this did calm him a little bit. However, there was no noticeable effect until some minutes after 10 o'clock, when Dr. D and Dr. F arrived, and I explained to them what I intended. They did not object, saying that the patient was already in the pain of death. I proceeded without delay, exchanging the sideways strokes for downward ones, and looking straight into the right eye of the patient. By this time his heartbeat was very weak, his breathing was noisy and at intervals of half a minute. This condition did not change for 15 minutes. At the end of this period, however, a very deep groan escaped the chest of the dying man. The noisy breathing stopped. The patient's hands and feet were icy cold. At 5 minutes before 11 o'clock, I saw plain signs of the hypnotic influence. The glass-like roll of the eye changed to the strange expression which you can see in people who are sleepwalking. With a few rapid sideways stroke of my hand, I made the lids shake as in early sleep. With a few more strokes, I closed them all together. I was not satisfied with this, however, and continued the strokes strongly and with maximum action of will until the arms and legs of the patient were completely stiff. The legs were stretched out at full length, and the arms were almost at full length and lay on the bed at a little distance from the side. The head was very slightly raised. It was midnight, and I requested the gentlemen present to examine Mr. Valdemar's condition. After a few experiments, they admitted he was in an unusually perfect state of hypnotic sleep. The interest of both the doctors was greatly excited. Dr. D resolved at once to remain with the patient all night, while Dr. F took leave with a promise to return at dawn. Mr. L, the nurses, and I remained. We left Mr. Valdemar in peace until about 3 o'clock in the morning, when I approached him and found him in precisely the same condition as when Dr. F went away. He lay in the same position, and his heartbeat was very weak. His breathing was gentle, hardly noticeable, unless through the application of a mirror to the lips. His eyes were closed naturally, and the arms and legs were as stiff and as cold as stone. Still, the general appearance was not that of death. As I approached Mr. Valdemar, I made a kind of half-effort to influence his right arm to follow my own, as I passed the latter gently to and from above him. In such experiments with this patient, I had never perfectly succeeded before and had little thought of succeeding now. However, to my surprise, his arm slowly followed mine. I decided to try a few words of conversation. "Mr. Valdemar," I said, "are you asleep?" He did not answer, but I saw a shaking about the lips. It appeared as if he wanted to speak, so I repeated the question again and then again. The third time, his whole frame shook very slightly. His eyelids opened themselves so far as to display a white line of the eyeball. The lips moved slowly, and from between them, in a whisper, I could only just hear, came the words, "Yes, asleep now. Do not wake me. Let me die." I felt the arms and legs and found them as stiff as ever. The right arm, as before, obeyed the direction of my hand. I questioned Mr. Valdemar again. "Do you still feel pain in the breast, Mr. Valdemar?" The answer now was immediate, but even softer than before. "No pain. I am dying. Please, let me die now." I did not think it wise to disturb him further just then, and nothing more was said or done until the arrival of Dr. F, who came a little before dawn. He was very surprised to find the patient still alive. After feeling the heartbeat and applying a mirror to the lips, he requested me to speak to Mr. Valdemar again. I did so by asking, "Mr. Valdemar, are you still asleep?" As before, some minutes passed before a reply was made. After I repeated the question 4 times, he said very faintly, "Yes, still asleep, dying." Chapter 3. The Patient is Hypnotized. The doctor suggested that Mr. Valdemar should remain undisturbed in his calm condition until death took, which we all agreed would take place within a few minutes. I decided, however, to speak to him once more and merely repeated my previous question. As I spoke, I noticed a marked change over the face of Mr. Valdemar. His eyes rolled slowly open, and his pupils disappeared upwards. The skin changed to the color of death. It looked like a white piece of paper. The spots on the center of each cheek lost color at once, too. The speed at which these things took place was that of putting out a candle by a breath. At the same time, the upper lip rolled away from the teeth, which had previously been covered completely. The lower jaw fell with an easy-to-hear click, leaving the mouth widely extended and showing in full view the swollen and black tongue. I assumed everyone in the room was used to seeing people dying. However, the sleepwaker's appearance was so ugly, so beyond what anyone could imagine, that we all pulled back from the bed in surprise. I now feel that I have reached a point of this story at which every reader will be shocked into doubt. It is my business, however, to simply proceed with my tale. There was no longer even a faint sign of life in Mr. Valdemar. We concluded that he was dead and started to leave the room. Suddenly, we could see a strong shaking in his tongue which continued for about a minute. At the end of this, there came from the swollen and still jaws a voice. I am crazy even to attempt to describe the scene, I can try to give two descriptions, but I do not know if either can be fully correct. I might say, for example, that the sound was rough and broken and hollow. However, I cannot describe it exactly for the simple reason that no similar sounds have ever been heard by man. There were two details which I thought then, and still think, might closely describe the characteristic of the tone. In the first place, the voice seemed to reach our ears, at least mine, from a vast distance or from some deep cave within the earth. In the second place, I was very impressed with the texture of the sound. I have spoken both of sound and of voice. I mean to say that the sound was clear, even extremely clear, and so was the pronunciation. The sleep-waker spoke obviously in reply to the question I had asked him a few minutes before. I had asked him, it will be remembered, if he still slept. He now said, "Yes, no, I have been sleeping, and now I am dead." Everyone was horrified by these few words which seemed so well calculated. Mr. L., the student, fainted. The nurses immediately left the chamber and would not return. My own impressions I would not pretend to make plain to the reader. For nearly an hour we kept ourselves busy, silently trying to restore Mr. L. When he came to himself, we directed ourselves again to an investigation of Mr. Valdemar's condition. It remained in all respects as I have last described it, with the exception that the mirror no longer showed evidence of breathing, and an attempt to draw blood from the arm failed. I should mention that this arm was no longer subject to my will. I tried, without result, to make it follow the direction of my hand. The only real indication of the hypnotic influence was found in the movement of the tongue whenever I asked Mr. Valdemar a question. He seemed to be making an effort to reply, but had no longer sufficient will. I tried to place each person in the room in a hypnotic connection with him, but he seemed to be unaware of questions asked by them. I believe that I have now related all that is necessary to an understanding of the sleep-waker state at this time. We brought other nurses, and at 10 o'clock I left the house with the two doctors and Mr. L. Chapter 4. The End Arrives. In the afternoon, we all went to see the patient. His condition remained precisely the same as before. We discussed if we should wake him, but we all agreed that there was no reason to do so. It was clear that death had been stopped by the hypnotic process, and that if we woke Mr. Valdemar up, he would die in an instant. From this period until the close of last week, an interval of nearly 7 months, we continued to make daily visits to Mr. Valdemar's house. At times, medical doctors and other friends accompanied us, yet all this time the sleep-waker remained exactly as I have last described him. The nurse's attention was constant, and it was on Friday that we finally decided to make the experiment of waking or attempting to wake him. It is perhaps the unfortunate result of this latter experiment which has given rise to so much discussion in private circles. For the purpose of waking Mr. Valdemar from the hypnotic sleep, I made use of the usual strokes which were, for a time, unsuccessful. The first indication of waking could be seen by the dropping of a pupil, which was followed by a great quantity of a yellow liquid oozing from beneath his eyelids and a strong smell. It was now suggested that I try to influence the patient's arm as I had before. I made the attempt and failed. Dr. F. then asked me to ask him a question, which I did as follows. "Mr. Valdemar, can you explain to us what are your views or wishes now?" There was an instant return of the red circles on the cheeks. The tongue rolled violently in the mouth, although the jaws and lips remained stiff as before, and the same ugly voice which I have already described broke out. "In the name of God, quick, quick, put me to sleep, or wake me up! Quick! I say to you that I am dead!" I was thoroughly frightened, and for an instant did not know what to do. At first I made an attempt to wake the patient, but failing in this, I went back over my steps and sincerely struggled to wake him. In this attempt it seemed like I would be successful, or at least I soon thought that my success would be complete. I am sure everyone in the room was prepared to see the patient wake up. However, I don't think any human being could really have been prepared for what happened next. As I made the hypnotic strokes, words burst from the tongue and not from the lips of the patient. "Dead! Dead!" Suddenly, his whole body frame disappeared within seconds, falling to pieces beneath my hands. On the bed lay a disgusting liquid of terrible decay. The Mystery of Marie Roget. Chapter 1. Marie Disappears. I'm going to tell an unusual story. It is a story about how a number of different events that seemed to be coincidences proved to be something more. About a year ago, I thought I would never again have to describe the remarkable abilities of my friend, the Chevalier C. Auguste Dupin. I did not think it was something I would ever write about again. When I first wrote about my intelligent friend, it was because he had solved the murders of Madame L'Espanaye and her daughter. After that investigation ended, the Chevalier forgot about the murders and fell back into his old habit of daydreaming. In our rooms in the Faubourg Saint-Germain in Paris, we gave little thought to the future and lived quietly in the moment. But our daydreams were not without interruption. The role of my friend in the drama at the Rue Morgue had come to the attention of the police as the affair was seen as amazing. The Chevalier's skills were seen as a sixth sense. His honesty would have made him tell people it was not a sixth sense, but his lazy nature stopped him from doing so. The police attempted to engage his services in many cases. One of the most remarkable was the murder of a young girl whose name was Marie Roget. It is her story that I wish to tell. This happened about 2 years after the murders in the Rue Morgue. Marie was the only daughter of a widow, as her father died when she was a baby. From the time of his death until around 18 months before her murder, she lived with her mother in the guest house they kept. When Marie was 22, her great beauty was noticed by a perfumer who had a shop in the basement of the Palais Royal. His customers were mostly the hopeless adventurers in that neighborhood. Monsieur Leblanc was aware of the advantages of having the beautiful Marie work in his perfumery, and she readily accepted his generous job offer to work there, but her mother was not pleased about it. His room soon became well known because Marie was such an attractive and lively young girl. She had been working for him for about a year when her followers were upset by her sudden disappearance. Monsieur Leblanc could not explain her absence. Madame Roget was filled with anxiety and fear. The public papers immediately took up the story, and the police were about to make serious investigations. Then, a week later, Marie suddenly returned in good health, but a little sad. The investigation was stopped, and Monsieur Leblanc still knew nothing. Marie and her mother told people that she had spent the last week at the house of a country relative. The matter was forgotten. To avoid curiosity, the girl left her job and went to live with her mother again. About 5 months later, her friends were puzzled by her sudden disappearance for a second time. 3 days passed and nothing was heard of her. On the 4th day, her body was found floating in the River Seine. When the body was discovered, it was thought that the murderer would be found quickly. It was not until a week later that a payment was offered. Yet the reward was only 1,000 francs. At the end of the 10th day, the amount was doubled. When the second week went by without any discoveries, the police captain offered a reward of 20,000 francs. A full pardon was promised to any partner in crime who should come forward. Members of the public offered an extra 10,000 francs for the reward, making the full amount 30,000 francs. This was a lot of money, given the lowly position of the dead girl and the high number of people murdered in large cities like Paris. No one doubted that the murder would now be quickly solved. 1 or 2 arrests were made, but nothing came to light, and these people were let go. 3 weeks passed without any information before either Dupin or I heard of it. G., the captain of the police, brought the first news of the murder when he called upon us early in the afternoon of the 13th of July, 18. He remained with us until late into the night. He had been annoyed by his failure to find the killers. His good name was at stake. The eyes of the public were on him, and he would do anything to solve the mystery. He made Dupont a generous offer if he agreed to help. He did so at once, and I offered to assist him. In the morning at the police station, I got a full report of all the evidence. I also got a copy of every paper in which any important information had been published about this sad affair. This was the information we had. Marie Roget left her mother's home in the Rue Pavie Saint-André at about 9 o'clock in the morning. It was Sunday, June the 22nd, 18. She told only a Mr. Jacques Saint-Eustache of her intention to spend the day with an aunt who lived in the Rue des Drômes, a short, narrow, and crowded main road, not far from the edges of the river. It is 2 miles from the guest house of Madame Roget. Saint-Eustache was promised to marry Marie and was planning to go and bring her home at nightfall. In the afternoon it started to rain heavily. Saint-Eustache supposed that she would stay the night at her aunt's, meaning he did not think that he needed to take her home. As night fell, Madame Roget, who was a sick lady and 70 years old, was heard to say that she would never see Marie again. At the time, this had attracted little attention. Chapter 2. A Body is Found. On the Monday, it was found out that Marie had not been to the Rue des Drômes. When the day went by without news, a late search was made in the city and close areas. It was not until the 4th day after her disappearance that anything satisfactory was discovered. On this day, Wednesday, the 25th of June, a Mr. Bouvet and his friend had been asking for Marie near the Barrière de Roule, which is on the shore of the Seine, opposite the Rue Pavie Saint-André. He was informed that a body had just been brought to the shore by some fishermen who had found it in the river. Upon seeing the body, after some hesitation, Bouvet had identified it as that of the perfumery girl. His friend knew it more quickly. The face was covered with dark blood, some of which came from the mouth. The throat was covered in purple marks and the press of fingers. The arms were bent over on the chest and had become rigid. The right hand was held in a fist. The left was partly open. On the left wrist were 2 round skin sores, apparently the effect of ropes, and a part of the right wrist was also much rubbed. In addition, the back and the shoulder blades, the neck was very swollen. There were no cuts or marks that appeared to be the result of blows. A piece of lace was found tied so tightly around the neck it was completely hidden in the flesh, and it was tied just under the left ear. This alone would have produced death, yet she had been subjected to cruel violence. The condition of the body was such that friends would have difficulty in knowing it. The dress was much torn and untidy. On the outside, a piece about a foot wide had been torn upward from the edge to the waist. It was wound 3 times around the waist and tied at the back. The dress below was of fine material, and from this, a piece 18 inches wide had been torn out very evenly and with great care. It was found tied roughly around her neck by a hard knot. The ties of a hat were joined to this material, yet the knot by which the strings of the hat were tied was not a lady's, but that of a sailor. After the discovery of the body, it was not taken to the mortuary as usual, but speedily buried near the spot at which it was brought to shore. Through the efforts of Bouvet, the matter was kept quiet, and so several days had gone by before any public emotion resulted when a weekly paper finally took up the matter. The body was dug up and re-examined, but nothing new was found. The girl's clothes were now shown to the mother and friends of the dead girl. They knew them as those worn by her when she had left home on the Sunday. People wondered if Saint-Eustache had killed Marie. At first he did not explain where he was on the Sunday on which Marie had left home, but he later made statements to Mr. G. These gave satisfactory explanations for his activities every hour of the day in question. As time passed and there was no news, 1,000 different reports went around. Journalists came up with many ideas. One being that Marie Roget still lived and that the body found in the Seine River was that of some other girl. One put forward some discussions on this. Mademoiselle Roget left her mother's house on Sunday morning, June the 22nd, 18, to see her aunt in the Rue des Drômes. From that hour, nobody seems to have seen her. On Wednesday at noon, a female body was found floating on the water near the shore of the Barrière du Roule. This was only 3 days from the time she left her home. If the body found in the river was Marie's, it could only have been in the water 2.5 days or 3 at the outside. All experience has shown that drowned bodies, or bodies thrown into the water immediately after violent death, require from 6 to 10 days for breakdown to take place and to bring them to the top of the water. The writer here proceeds to argue that the body must have been in the water not only 3 days but at least 5 times that, because it was so far decayed that Bouvet had great difficulty in knowing it. Why then does Monsieur Bouvet say he has no doubt that the body was that of Marie Roget? Because he ripped up the dress sleeve and found marks which satisfied him of the body's identity. The public generally thought those marks were some type of scar, but he rubbed the arm and found hair on it, which is hardly decisive. The paper tried to show that there was little interest from the relatives of Marie, but this was proved to be untrue. The old lady was very weak and too nervous to go anywhere. Saint Eustache was mad with pain and loss. Monsieur Bouvet asked a friend to stop Saint Eustache from attending the digging up of the body. In a later issue of the paper, an attempt was made to throw doubt upon Bouvet. A few days before the girl's disappearance, a visitor had gone to Bouvet's office when he was absent. Here they saw a rose in the keyhole of the door and the name Marie written upon a board nearby. Chapter 3. Doubts are raised. It seemed from the newspaper reports that Marie had been killed by a gang of criminals. However, Le Commercial, a widely read newspaper, seriously disagreed with this popular idea. To quote, "We feel that the hunt has been on a false path by focusing on the Barrière du Roule. It is impossible that someone as well known to many hundreds of people as this young woman was could have passed 3 streets without anyone having seen her. She went out when the streets were full of people, yet no one who saw her outside has come forward. There is no evidence that she did go out at all. The fact that the body was found floating near the Barrière is no evidence of where it was thrown into the water. A piece of the unfortunate girl's underskirt, 2 feet long and 1 foot wide, was torn out and tied under her chin and around the back of her head. This was probably done to prevent screams. A day or 2 before the captain came to see us, some important information reached the police. This seemed to bring doubt to Le Commercial's debate. 2 small boys, sons of a Madame de Luc, had gone roaming among the forest near the Barrière du Roule. They went into the thick greenery and found 3 or 4 large stones, forming a kind of seat, with a back and rest. On the first stone lay a white underdress. On the second stone lay a neckcloth, and an umbrella, gloves, and a pocket handkerchief were also found. The handkerchief bore the name Marie Roget. Pieces of dress were discovered on the trees around this area. The earth was flattened, the trees were broken, and there was evidence of a fight. Between the forest and the river, the fences were down, and there were signs of some heavy load having been pulled along the ground. A weekly paper, Le Soleil, made the following comments. The things that were found had all evidently been there at least 3 or 4 weeks. They were all wet and glued together with mildew. The pieces of dress that were torn out were about 3 inches wide and 6 inches long. One was the bottom of a dress, and it had been repaired. The other was part of a skirt. There can be no doubt, therefore, that the place where the murder took place has been discovered. After that, new evidence appeared. Madame de Luc stated that she kept a hotel by the side of the road not far from the edge of the river, opposite the Barrière du Roule. On Sundays, bad characters from the city who cross the river in boats visit there. About 3 in the afternoon on the Sunday in question, a young girl arrived at the hotel with a dark-skinned young man. The 2 remained there for some time and then took the road to some thick forest nearby. Madame de Luc noticed the dress and the neckcloth worn by the girl. Soon after the couple left, a team of troublemakers arrived. They behaved noisily, ate and drank without paying, and followed after the young man and girl. They returned to the hotel about sundown and recrossed the river in a rush. It was soon after dark on the same evening that Madame de Luc and her oldest son heard the violent but short screams of a female near the hotel. Madame D knew the neckcloth which was found in the trees and the dress which was discovered on the body. A bus driver, Valence, also stated that he had seen Marie Roget cross the Seine on the Sunday in question with a young man who had dark features. He, Valence, knew Marie and could not mistake her. The things found in the undergrowth were identified as Marie's by her relatives. The bits of evidence and information collected by me from the newspapers took in only one more point of great importance. Immediately after the discovery of the clothes, as described above, the nearly dead body of Saint Eustache, Marie's fiancé, was found near what was now supposed to be the scene of the crime. An empty bottle marked morphine was found near him, and his breath smelled of the poison. He died without speaking, and a letter was found on his body, briefly stating his love for Marie and his intention to kill himself. As he finished reading my notes, Dupont said, "This is a far more difficult case than that of the Rue Morgue. This is an ordinary, although horrible crime. Yet there is nothing particularly unusual about it. That is why it has been considered easy, but it should have been seen as difficult. In the case of Madame L'Espanaye and her daughter, there was no doubt that there had been a murder. The idea of self-murder was put away at once. There is also no theory of self-murder in this case. Some people thought that the body discovered was not that of Marie Roget. It is for her case that the reward is offered. We both know this gentleman well, but it will not do to trust him too far. If we discover this body to be that of someone other than Marie, or if we find her alive, we lose our work. After all, it is Mr. G with whom we have to deal. It is therefore very important that we should make sure the body is that of Marie Roget who is missing. It is the debate of one newspaper that has influenced the public. The newspaper is convinced. It is right. You can see this from the way it reports on the murder. It is the drama of the idea that Marie Roget is alive rather than any real chance of this that makes people believe their idea. Let us look at their idea. The writer says the time between Marie's disappearance and the finding of the body was too short. That is why the body cannot be hers. It is stupid to think, the writer says, that the murder could have happened early enough for the body to be thrown into the river before midnight. Why is it stupid to think so? The murder could have happened within 5 minutes after the girl left her mother's house. If the murder happened any time between 9 o'clock on Sunday morning and a quarter before midnight on Sunday night, there would have been time enough to throw the body into the river before midnight. The writer is assuming that the murder was not done on Sunday at all. Chapter 4. Dupin considers the evidence. If I was trying to make a case against the newspaper debate, continued Dupin, I might leave it where it is. However, it is not with Le Soleil that we must deal, but with the truth. The journalist said that no matter what time this murder was carried out, it was too difficult for the killers to take the body to the river before midnight. There is also another guess about the killing. It is that the murder was carried out in a place that made taking the body to the river necessary. Now the killing may have taken place upon the river's edge. It may also have happened on the river itself. If so, the body may have been thrown into the water at any time of the day or night. That means if the body was Marie's, it would only have been in the water for a short time. The newspaper goes on to say, experience has shown that drowned bodies need to lie in water for about 6 to 10 days before enough breakdown takes place to bring them to the top of the water. It is the same for bodies thrown into the water immediately after death by violence. These statements have been silently received by every paper in Paris. The only exception is the newspaper Le Moniteur, which goes against that theory about drowned bodies. It mentions some 5 or 6 examples in which drowned bodies were found on top of the water after only a short time. We must look at the reasoning of the rule. The human body in its natural condition has about the same mass as the water it replaces. The bodies of women and fat people are lighter than those of men or thin people with large bones. Very few human bodies will sink, even in fresh water, without weights. Almost anyone falling into a river will be able to rise to the top. When a person is trying to avoid drowning, they throw their arms up and try to keep their head in its usual straight position. Once their mouth and nose sink below the water, a lot of water enters their lungs and stomach, which makes the whole body heavier and causes it to sink. Only people with small bones and fat bodies will not sink. They stay on top of the water even after drowning. The body of a fat person will stay on top of the water until it starts to waste away. But wasting is changed by many things. It is changed by heat or cold. It is changed by the cleanness of the water. It is changed by how deep or shallow the water is. It is changed by whether the water runs or is still. It is also changed by the state of the body. Therefore, we cannot be sure when the body will rise because of wasting. It might be an hour, or it might not happen at all. We can test the guess of L'Etoile. Experience shows that drowned bodies, or bodies thrown into the water immediately after death by violence, require 6 to 10 days of wasting away to bring them to the top of the water. The statement now appears illogical. The debate is that the body found could not be that of Marie Roget. This is said because only 3 days had passed when this body was found on top of the water. If drowned, being a woman, she may never have sunk. But no one thinks she drowned in the first place. If she died before being thrown into the river, she may have been found on top of the water at any time afterwards. But, says L'Etoile, if the body had been kept on shore until Tuesday night, some trace of the murderers would be found on the shore. It is not very likely that anyone who did such a murder would have thrown the body in without weight to sink it. No one doubts that the body which was found had been murdered. The writer is only trying to show that this body is not Marie's. Now read again the debate which mentions the naming of the body by Bouvet. In regard to the hair on the arm, L'Etoile has obviously been less than honest. No arm is without hair. The witness must have seen something strange in this hair. The newspaper then continues, the feet of the body were small, but there are many people with small feet. Her sock holder is also not evidence. The same may be said of the flowers in her hat. Monsieur Bouvet is very sure that the tie on the sock holder had been taken in. If Monsieur Bouvet discovered a body similar in size and appearance to the missing girl, he would have been right to think he had found Marie. If he had found upon the arm a strange, hairy appearance that he had seen on the living Marie, his opinion would be stronger. If Marie's feet were small and those of the body were also small, it also makes sense to think the dead girl must be Marie. The body also had the same shoes Marie was wearing when she disappeared. The evidence appears to prove that the body is Marie's. The flowers in the hat were also the same as those worn by the missing girl. Then we also learned that the sock holders on the dead girl were the same as those Marie used. It seems almost stupid to say more. These sock holders were also found to be taken in the same way that Marie had tightened her socks. It seems mad to doubt the body is Marie's. In respect to the accusations made against Bouvet, you can drop them in a breath. We already know the true character of this good gentleman. He is a busybody, with much romance and little humor. Anyone like that will act, in a situation of high drama, in such a way to bring doubt on himself. It appears Monsieur Bouvet had some personal interviews with the journalist at L'Etoile and annoyed him by stating that the body was that of Marie. The doubts about him are most likely because he is a romantic busybody. It is not really because the journalist is sure of his guilt. With this in mind, it is easy to understand the rose in the keyhole and why Marie was written on the board. I can also understand why Bouvet pushed Marie's male relatives out of the way. It seems to me that he was in love with Marie, and I think she led him on, and he wanted other people to think he was close to her. From now on, we will think about the murder as if we are sure the body was Marie's. Chapter 5. More Opinions Considered. And what, I asked, do you think of the opinions of Le Commercial? I think they are worth far more attention than any other opinions on the murder. Le Commercial wishes us to think that Marie was taken by a team of criminals not far from her mother's door. It is impossible that a person so well known to many hundreds as this young woman could have gone 3 streets without being seen. It is possible that Marie may have walked any one of the many paths between her own home and that of her aunt. She may not have met a single person whom she knew or who knew her. And what are we to think, I asked, of the article in Le Soleil? The writer has just repeated opinions from other newspapers. For the moment, we must take up other investigations. You must have noted the great carelessness of the examination of the body. We have decided for ourselves that it is Marie's body, but there are other points to be learned. We need to know if the body was harmed in any way. Had the dead person worn any jewelry when they left home? If so, was she wearing it when she was found? These are important questions that the known facts do not answer. There are also many other unanswered questions. We must satisfy ourselves with a personal investigation. The case of Saint Eustache must be re-examined. I do not believe he was the killer, but let us be careful. We will learn the truth about where he was on that Sunday. If we find nothing wrong, we will leave Saint Eustache out of our investigations. Following Dupin's advice, I carefully examined statements about Saint Eustache. The result was that I came to believe Saint Eustache was innocent. In the meantime, my friend looked closely at the numbers of newspaper records. At the end of the week, he showed me the following cuttings. About 5 or 6 months ago, there was similar trouble with Marie Roget when she disappeared from the perfumery of Mr. Leblanc in the Palais Royal. After a week, she reappeared, but had less color than usual. Mr. Leblanc reported her mother had said that she had been visiting some friend in the country, and after that the matter was quickly silenced. We think the same thing has happened this time. At the end of a week or even a month, we shall have her with us again. Evening paper, Monday, June 23rd. An evening paper from yesterday mentions a past disappearance of Marie Roget. That time everyone was also puzzled. It is well known that during her absence from Leblanc's perfumery, she was with a young sailor who was known for being dishonest. People think that a quarrel between Marie and the sailor led to her return home. We have the name of the lover in question, and at the moment he is stationed in Paris. For obvious reasons, we will not make his name public. Le Mercury, Tuesday morning, June 24th. A crime of the most awful kind was carried out near this city the day before yesterday. About sundown, a gentleman with his wife and daughter paid 6 young men to row him across the river. Upon reaching the opposite side, the 3 passengers stepped out and disappeared out of sight of the boat. Then the daughter discovered that she had left her umbrella in the boat, so she returned for it and was taken by the team of criminals and carried out into the river. A piece of material was put over her mouth. She was cruelly treated and finally taken to the shore, near where she had entered the boat with her parents. The criminals escaped, but the police are on their tail. Some of them will soon be arrested. Morning paper, June 25th. We have received many strongly worded letters. These letters seem to make it certain that the unfortunate Marie Roget was injured by one of the teams of criminals that crowd near the city on Sundays. We agree with this, and we will try to make room for some of these debates shortly. Evening paper, Tuesday, June 31st. On Monday, one of the local boatmen saw an empty boat down the Seine. Sails were lying in the bottom of the boat. The boatman pulled it under the boat office. The next morning it was gone. The wheel which the boatman removed is now at the boat office. Le Diligence, Thursday, June 26th. Upon reading these writings, I could see no way in which any of them could be tied to the matter in hand. I waited for some explanation from Dupin. I do not intend to make much of the first and second of those writings. I have copied them to show you the carelessness of the police, who, as the captain has told me, never looked for the sailor. It is stupid to say that between the first and second disappearance of Marie there is no link. Let us say that the first time when she ran off, there was a quarrel between the lovers, and she returned home. If she tried to run away for a second time, it makes sense to see this as a return of her lover's attentions, rather than as a new offer by a second person. Let me call your notice to the fact that the time between the first and second supposed running away is a few months, more than the usual time of service of our warships. Had the lover been interrupted the first time by the need to go to sea? Did he take the first moment of his return to start his efforts again? We do not know. You will say that the second time there was no evidence of running away. Certainly not, but how can we know for sure? Beyond St. Eustache and perhaps Beauvais, we find no well-thought-of lovers of Marie. Who, then, is the secret lover of whom the relatives know nothing, but whom Marie meets on Sunday morning? She remained with him in the forest of the Barrière du Roule until night fell. And what was the meaning of the curious statement of Madame Roget on the morning of Marie's departure? I fear that I shall never see Marie again. Chapter 6. The Popular Opinion. The common opinion is that the girl was attacked by a team of criminals. Now, the popular opinion should not be overlooked. In this case, however, it appears to me that this public opinion has been brought on by a similar event to Marie's, something similar that happened at the same time as her murder. All Paris is excited by the discovery of Marie's body. She is a young, beautiful girl with a doubtful character. It is now known that at the time she was killed, a similar but lesser crime was also carried out. This crime was done by a team of young, violent men upon a second young female. And it is not surprising that the other attack should influence the popular opinion about the murder. Marie, too, was found in the river, and it would have been surprising if the public had not been influenced. It would have been amazing if, while one team of criminals was carrying out one awful crime at a given place, there should have been a similar team doing the same thing nearby. Naturally, people would think it was the same team who hurt both girls. Yet what does this opinion of the people want us to believe? Before going on, let us consider the supposed scene of the killing in the forest at the Barrière du Roule. Even though the press was excited by this discovery and it was widely accepted this was the scene of the killing, there was good reason for doubt. If the true scene had been near the Rue Pavée Saint-André, the criminals would have been struck with fear at this public attention and attempted to turn it somewhere else. There is no real evidence that the articles discovered in the forest had been there more than a few days. It is extremely difficult to find privacy anywhere close to Paris, especially on Sundays. It is not very likely that the articles in question would have lain undiscovered longer than 1 week. But there are other grounds for thinking that the articles were placed in the forest to take attention from the real scene of the crime. Firstly, let us look at the date of the discovery of the articles. You will find that the discovery followed, almost immediately, the urgent letters sent to the evening paper. Although the letters are supposed to be from different writers, they all drew attention to the same point. They all suggest that a team of youths were the criminals, and they all suggest that the Barrière du Roule was the scene of the crime. Now, of course, it could be that because of these letters, or the public attention they received, articles were found by the boys. However, it may well have been that the articles were not found before because they were not there before. This forest was very thick, and it was very close to the house of Madame de Luc, whose boys visited there often. It seems unlikely that a day passed when at least one of these boys could be found there, sitting on the rocks. It is very hard to understand how the articles could have remained undiscovered for longer than 1 or 2 days. Therefore, it is very likely that they were put there at a later date. Then there is the highly unusual arrangement of the articles. I would have expected to see the things lying on the ground and flattened underfoot. It is also not likely that pieces of material were torn off by sharp points. I believe it had been done purposely. Then there is the surprising fact of the articles being left in this forest at all. Why would murderers think to take clothes off the body? However, I am not denying this forest was the scene of the crime. There might have been a crime here, and there may also have been an accident at Madame de Luc's. We are not trying to discover the scene. We are trying to produce the killers. I would like you to consider whether this killing was the work of a team. All the well-known scientists of Paris have called the published guess of the number of criminals who killed Marie totally baseless. Let us look now at the traces of a fight. These traces have been supposed to show that a team killed Marie. But do they not show the absence of a team? What fight could have taken place between a weak and powerless girl and a team of criminals? The silent hold of a few rough arms, and all would have been over. Keep in mind that the debate against the forest as the scene is only against it as the scene of a crime carried out by more than a single person. If there was only one person with Marie, it is easier to imagine a fight of so violent a nature as to have left these traces. I have already mentioned my suspicion about the articles in question. I am not so sure they were left in the forest at all. It seems almost impossible that these traces of guilt could have been left there accidentally. There seemed to be enough presence of mind to take away the body, yet the handkerchief with the name of the dead girl was left clearly at the scene of the crime. If this was a mistake, it was not the mistake of a team. We can imagine it only as the mistake of one person. One person has carried out this murder, and he is alone with the dead. His anger is over, and he is scared of what he has done. He does not have the confidence found in numbers. He is confused, but he has to deal with the body. He takes it to the river, but leaves behind him evidences of guilt. He cannot carry everything at once. It will be easy to return for what is left. He reaches the river's edge and deals with the body, perhaps using a boat. But he does not return to the forest. His only thought is to escape. So he turns his back on those horrible trees and runs away. But if there had been a team, their number would have given them confidence. They would not have been scared, as I imagine the single man was. They would have left nothing behind them, as they would have been able to carry everything at once. Consider now that in the outer article of clothing on the body when found, a piece, about a foot wide, had been torn upward from the bottom edge to the waist. It was wound 3 times around the waist and fixed at the back. Obviously, this was done to make a handle by which to carry the body. But if there had been a number of men, the arms and legs of the body would have been the best possible hold. Then there is the fact that between the forest and the river, the fences were taken down, and the ground bore evident traces of some heavy load having been pulled along it. But would a number of men have bothered to take down a fence if they could have lifted the body over it? Would a number of men have left evident traces of the pulling? And here we must mention a comment of Le Commercial. A piece of the unlucky girl's underskirt was torn out and tied under her chin and around the back of her head, probably to prevent screams. The aim was not to prevent screams, the single murderer having carried the body for some distance, using the cloth tied around its middle, found the weight too much for his power. With this in mind, it became necessary to use a rope. It could be best joined about the neck, where the head would prevent its falling off. The murderer certainly thought of the material about the middle of the body. He would have used this, but it was turned around the body and would have been difficult to take off. It was easier to tear a new piece from the underskirt, which he then tied around the neck. This is how he pulled his victim to the edge of the river. But Madame de Luc's evidence points to a team of criminals near the forest. There were probably a dozen teams in and about the Barrière du Roule at the time. But the team mentioned by Madame de Luc is the only team which had eaten her cakes and swallowed her brandy without paying. What is the real evidence of Madame de Luc? A team of noisy criminals appeared, ate and drank without paying, and followed the young man and girl. They returned to the hotel about sunset and recrossed the river as if in a great hurry. We should not be surprised that even a team of criminals should hurry to get home when a wide river is to be crossed in small boats. They would be in more of a hurry if a storm was on its way and night was approaching. I say approaching, for the night had not yet arrived. It was only about sunset that the rush of these criminals was noticed. But we are told that it was in the evening that Madame de Luc and her oldest son heard the screams of a female near the hotel. It was soon after dark, she says, but soon after dark means the sky was already dark. About sunset is certainly daylight. Therefore, it is very clear that the team left the Barrière du Roule before Madame de Luc heard the screams. No one else has noticed this time difference. Not the newspapers or the police have noticed it. I will just add one more thing in the argument that a team of criminals did not do this. Given that a large reward was offered and a full pardon was offered for any king's evidence, it is not likely that some member of such a team would not long ago have given up the others for the reward. Chapter 7. The Final Word. Let us add up the results of our examination of the evidence. We have decided it was either a deadly accident at Madame de Luc's or a murder in the forest at the Barrière du Roule. If it was a murder, it was done by a lover or a close and secret friend of Marie's, and this friend is a dark-skinned man. This, with the knot in the bandage, and the sailor's knot, with which the hat ribbon is tied, point to a sailor. His friendship with the dead woman, a bright young girl, puts him above a common sailor, and his well-written and urgent letters to the newspapers also show this. The first disappearance of Marie Roget tends to mix together the idea of this sailor with that of the naval officer first known to have led Marie into crime. Think about the continued absence of the man with the dark skin. Was he murdered by the criminals? If so, why are there only traces of the dead girl? The scene of the two crimes would be the same place if he was really dead too. And where is his body? The killers would probably have got rid of both in the same way. It could be said that this man lives and that he does not come forward through fear that he will be charged with the murder. The first desire of an innocent man would have been to make known the killing. He would have wanted to help point out the criminals. He was seen with the girl, and he crossed the river with her in an open boat. If he accused the killers, people would not think he had killed Marie himself. We cannot suppose him both innocent himself and not knowing of the crime, yet it is possible to imagine that he would not have, if still alive, pointed out the killers. And how can we find out the truth? Let us look at the first disappearance. Let us know the full history of the officer. Where was he at the exact time of the murder? Let us carefully compare the different letters sent to the evening paper and look at the letters that lay the blame on a team of criminals. Then let us compare these letters with the known writings of the officer. Let us try to find out by questioning of Madame de Luc and her boys. Let us also question the bus driver, Valens. They may be able to tell us something more of the appearance and manner of the dark-skinned man. And let us trace the boat picked up by the boatman on the morning of Monday, the 23rd of June. I mean the boat that was taken from the boat office without the knowledge of the officer on duty and that was found without the wheel. Remember that this boat was also found before the discovery of Marie's body. We will find this boat, for the boatman knows it, and we have the wheel. And here let me ask a question. The finding of this boat was not publicly known. Yet how did its owner manage, as early as Tuesday morning, to know where the boat was, unless there was some link with the Navy? In speaking of the single killer pulling the body to the shore, I have already mentioned the possibility of his using a boat. Now, we are to understand that Marie Roget was pushed from a boat. The body could not have been left at the shallow water's edge. The curious marks on the back and shoulders of the dead person tell of lying in the bottom of a boat. That the body was found without weights also backs up that idea. If thrown from the edge, there would have been a weight. Having freed himself of the body, the murderer would have hurried to the city and left the boat at some little-known spot. He would have been in too great a hurry to tie up the boat and would let it go. In the morning, he is horror-struck to find that the boat has been picked up and taken to a spot where he goes each day. The next night, without daring to ask for the wheel, he takes the boat. Now, where is that boat? Let it be one of our first things we look for. This boat will guide us quickly to the person who used it at midnight of the deadly Sunday. Evidence will rise upon evidence, and the murderer will be traced. In time, the murderer was traced, and the captain satisfied the terms of his contract with the Chevalier. The oval painting. The estate which my servant Pedro had broken into was one of those piles of mixed shadows and size which have long stood the Apennines. He broke in by force rather than to permit me to pass a night in the open air because I was badly wounded. The house seemed to have been temporarily and very lately abandoned, so we established ourselves in one of the smallest and least richly decorated apartments, which lay in a remote tower of the building. It was decorated richly, yet everything was torn and antique. Its walls were hung with wall hangings and covered with many different army prizes, and there were also an unusually great number of very lively modern paintings in frames of rich golden leaves. These paintings hung from the main wall surfaces and also in very many corners of the strange design of the house. In these paintings I took a deep interest, perhaps because of my early fever. I asked Pedro to close the heavy panels over the windows of the room, since it was already night, and I asked him to light the tall candles that stood by the head of my bed, and to throw open far and wide the curtains of black silk which surrounded the bed itself. I wished this to be done so that if I could not sleep, at least I could choose between looking at these pictures and reading a small volume which was on the pillow. I imagined the book was supposed to judge and describe the paintings. Long I read, and sincerely. I also stared sincerely at the paintings. The hours flew by quickly, and deep midnight came. The position of the candles did not please me so. I reached out carefully, not wanting to disturb my sleeping servant, and placed the candle so as to throw its light more fully upon the book. But the action produced an effect altogether not anticipated. The light of the many candles now fell within a corner of the room, which had been thrown into deep shade by one of the bedposts. Thus I saw, in brilliant light, a picture I had not noticed before. It was the painting of a young girl, just growing into a woman. I looked at the painting quickly and then closed my eyes. Why I did this was not at first apparent even to me, but while my lids were shut, I thought about my reason for shutting them. It was a movement to gain time for thought. I wanted to be sure that my vision had not deceived me, and I needed to calm and control my thoughts for a more careful look. In a few moments I again stared at the painting. That I saw correctly, I now did not doubt. The first flashing of the candles upon that painting had seemed to drive away the dream, which was stealing over my senses, and to shock me back into waking life. The painting, as I have already said, was that of a young girl. It only showed her head and shoulders. The arms, the chest, and even the ends of the shining hair melted gradually into the unclear yet deep shadow which made the background. The frame was oval, richly golden and delicate. As a thing of art, nothing could be more beautiful than the painting itself, but it could have been neither the excellence of the work nor the undying beauty of the face which had so suddenly and so strongly moved me. It could perhaps have been my imagination, shaken from its half-sleep, that had mistaken the head for that of a living person. I noticed the unusual features of the design, of the brushwork, and of the frame at once, but instantly dismissed such an idea. Thinking seriously upon these points, I remained for an hour perhaps, half sitting and half lying down. My vision was fixed upon the painting. At length, satisfied with the true secret of its effect, I fell back within the bed. I had found the spell of the picture in an absolute lifelike expression. At first it surprised me, then it confused, checked, and finally shocked me. With deep respect and wonder, I placed the candles in their former position. The cause of my deep anxiety being shut from view, I quickly sought the volume which examined the paintings and their history. Turning to the number for the oval painting, I read the curious words which follow. She was a young woman of the rarest beauty, and as full of joy as she was lovely. Evil was the hour when she saw, loved, and married the painter. He was emotional, serious, and severe, and he already had a bride, his art. She was a young woman of rarest beauty, all light and smiles, and as lively as a young horse. She was very loving and took pleasure in all things. She hated only the art which was her rival. She feared only the paints and brushes which took her lover from her. It was thus a terrible thing for this lady to hear the painter speak of his desire to paint even his young bride. But she was quiet and did as he asked, and sat gently for many weeks in the dark, high tower room, where the light fell upon the pale painting only from above. But he, the painter, took pleasure in his work, which went on from hour to hour and from day to day. He was an emotional and wild man of many moods who became lost in dreams. He would not see that the terrible light which fell in that single tower wasted the health and the spirits of his bride. It was clear to all but him that she declined, yet she smiled on and still on, not complaining because she saw that the painter, who was well known, took a burning pleasure in his task. He worked day and night to paint her who so loved him, yet she grew daily more depressed and weak. And some who saw the painting spoke in low words of how much it looked like the wife. To them it was a great wonder and proof of the skill of the painter. They thought it showed his deep love for his wife, but at last, as the work drew to its conclusion, no people were admitted into the tower. This was because the painter had grown wild with the burning desire of his work. He only turned his eyes away from painting to look at the face of his wife. He would not see that the colors which he spread upon the painting came from her cheeks. When many weeks had passed and there was little painting left to do, the spirit of the lady again flashed up. It was like the flame in the opening of the lamp. All the painter still had to do was make one brush upon the mouth and paint one color on the eye. The brush was given and the color was placed. For one moment the painter stood absorbed before the work which he had done. While he stared, he suddenly grew unsteady and very pale. Shocked, he cried out loudly, "This is indeed life itself!" Then he turned suddenly to look at his loved one, but she was dead. The Pit and the Pendulum. Chapter 1. The Judgment is Made. I was sick to death, and when at last I was untied and allowed to sit, I felt that my mind was leaving me. The last clear sound I had heard was the judgment of my death. After that, the sound of questioning voices seemed to be a dreamy whisper. For a while I saw the lips of the black-robed judges. The lips were white and extremely thin and hard, with no care for human pain. And I saw that the rulings of law were still coming from those lips. I saw them say my name, and I shook because I heard no sound. For a few moments of feverish horror, I saw the soft waving of the black curtains around the walls of the apartment. Then I saw the 7 tall candles upon the table. At first they seemed white and slim protectors who would save me. But suddenly a terrible sickness came over me. The protectors became empty ghosts with heads of fire, and I saw that they would not help me. I thought how restful it must be in the grave. But just as I came to accept that, the judges were gone. The tall candles went out, darkness fell, all feelings disappeared, and then there was silence, stillness, and darkness. I had passed out, but I was still partly awake. I can't describe my state, but all was not lost. Even in the grave all is not lost, or else there is no hope of life after death. When we wake up from the deepest sleep, we break the film of some dream. Yet a second afterward, we do not remember that we have dreamed. Among many attempts to remember, there have been moments when I have thought of things that could only go back to that time when I seemed unconscious. These weak memories tell of tall shapes that took me in silence down, still down, till a horrible confusion took over. They tell also of horror because of my heart's unnatural stillness. What follows is a sense of sudden stillness. It is as if those who carried me had paused from the heaviness of their work. After this I remember flatness and wetness, and then all is madness. Suddenly the feeling and movement of my heart beating came back. There was a blank pause, then a sound, movement, and touch, a stinging feeling throughout my body, and then a full memory of the trial, of the judges, of the black curtains, of the ruling, of the sickness, of the passing out, then full forgetfulness of all that followed. So far I had not opened my eyes. I lay upon my back untied, so I reached out and felt something damp and hard. I dared not look at what it could be. I feared the first look at things around me. I was not afraid of looking at horrible things, but I was afraid in case there was nothing to see. At last, with a wild fear, I quickly opened my eyes and found my worst ideas were true. The blackness of everlasting night covered me. I fought for breath. I still lay quietly, trying to think calmly about the trial and to find out in what state I was. The sentence had passed, and it seemed that a very long time had gone by since then. Despite this, I did not for a moment suppose myself actually dead. A fearful idea now made my heart beat faster, and for a brief moment I passed out once more. Upon waking, I jumped to my feet, shaking all over, and throwing my arms wildly about me. I felt nothing, yet was frightened to move a step, in case I should be held back by the walls of a grave. Sweat covered my skin, and stood in big cold drops upon my face. The nervous pain grew at last impossible, and I carefully moved forward, with my arms in front and my eyes trying to catch some light. I went forward for many steps, but still all was blackness. I breathed more freely, and it seemed that mine was not to be the most horrible of deaths. As I continued to step carefully forward, I remembered many hundreds of stories of the horrors of Toledo. Was I left to die of hunger in this underground world of darkness, or did something worse wait for me? The result would be death of more than usual pain, as I knew my judges too well to doubt that the manner and the hour of my horrible death were all that I did not know. My stretched out hands at length met something hard. It was a stone wall, very even, oily, and cold. I followed it, stepping carefully. This, however, gave me no way of working out the size of my prison. The wall was so uniform, I might go all the way around and return to the beginning without knowing it. I therefore sought the knife that had been in my pocket so that I could push it into a small hole in the stonework to mark my starting point. But it was gone. My clothes had been changed for a covering of rough wool. I tore a part of the bottom from the robe and placed it at right angles to the wall. As I made my way around, I would find this cloth upon completing the journey. The problem was that I had not counted upon the size of the prison or upon my own weakness. The ground was wet and oily, but I carried on for some time until I tripped and fell. As I was extremely tired, I remained lying face down. I soon fell asleep. Chapter 2. The Horrors Begin. When I woke up, I found some bread and a jug with water next to me. I was too exhausted to think about this, but ate and drank greedily. Shortly afterward, I continued my tour around the prison and at last came to my small piece of cloth. When I fell, I had gone 52 steps. On starting again, I had counted another 48 before I arrived back at the piece of cloth. That meant there were 100 steps altogether. The problem was that there were so many different areas in the wall, I could not guess the shape of the basement I thought I was imprisoned in. Quitting the wall, I decided to cross the room. At first I moved forward with extreme care for the floor. It was wet, though solid. At last, however, I took courage and stepped forward firmly, trying to cross as directly as possible. I had gone 10 or 12 steps when the torn part of my robe became caught between my legs. I stepped on it and fell violently on my face. I did not immediately take in the fact that my chin rested upon the floor of the prison. My lips and the top of my head touched nothing, and a bad smell rose to my nose. I put forward my arm and found that I had fallen at the very edge of a round hole in the ground, but I could not tell how big the hole was. Feeling around the stones just below the edge, I knocked away a small piece and let it fall into the deep hole. For many seconds I listened to the noise as it hit against the sides, till at length there was a drop into water, followed by loud sounds coming back. At the same time there was a sound like the quick opening and closing of a door overhead, while a small light showed suddenly and then disappeared. I saw clearly what had been prepared for me, and I congratulated myself upon the timely accident which had helped me escape falling into the hole. The death I had just avoided was of the kind which I had regarded as not true and unlikely in the stories of the Inquisition. Its victims had the choice of death with the worst physical pains or death with its most terrible horrors of the spirit. I had been kept back for the second and experienced such great suffering that I had become very nervous and shook at the sound of my own voice. I was a fit subject for the torture that awaited me. Shaking all over, I found my way back to the wall. I decided to dive there rather than risk falling into the pits, as I now pictured there to be many of these pits around the cell. In another state of mind, I might have had courage to end my sadness at once by jumping into one of these holes, but now I was the greatest of cowards. I was awake for many long hours, but at last I slept. Upon waking, I again found by my side bread and water. A burning thirst had overtaken me, and I emptied the container with one mouthful. It must have been drugged, for I could not stay awake. A deep sleep fell upon me, a sleep like that of death. I do not know how long it lasted, but when I opened my eyes, I could see the objects around me. By a strange yellow light, I could see the size and position of the prison. I had been greatly mistaken about its size. The whole course of its walls was not more than 25 yards. In my first exploration, I had counted 52 steps up to the time when I fell. However, I must have been within a step or two of the piece of cloth. I then slept, and upon awaking, I must have gone back upon my steps. Therefore, I had thought the course nearly double what it actually was. I was also wrong about the shape of the cell. The overall shape of the prison was square, and what I had taken for bricks seemed now to be iron or some other metal placed in huge plates. The whole face of this metallic cell was roughly painted with ugly figures of creatures making threats. I now looked at the floor, which was of stone, and in the center yawned the round pit which I had escaped falling into. It was the only one in my prison cell. I now lay at full length upon my back on a low wooden frame. I was tied to it by a long rope which was around my arms, legs, and body, leaving free only my head. I could, if I had tried hard, get food from a dish that lay by my side on the floor, but I saw, to my horror, that the jug had been removed. I was terribly thirsty because the meat in the dish was very salty. I looked at the ceiling of my prison, which was some 30 or 40 feet high. In one of its sheets was the painted form of time. Instead of a cutting tool, it held what I supposed to be a huge weight, such as we see on old clocks. When I looked directly upward at the painting, I thought I saw the pendulum move. An instant afterward, I was sure it had moved. Its sweep was short and slow. I watched it for some minutes, and then I looked at the other objects in the cell. A small noise attracted me, and I saw several huge rats on the floor. They had come from the well. As I watched, they came up in crowds with hungry eyes, attracted by the smell of the meat. It took much effort and attention to scare them away. It might have been half an hour, perhaps even an hour, before I again looked, and what I saw amazed me. The sweep of the weight had increased by nearly a yard, and its speed was also much greater. But I now saw with horror that its back end was a half circle of shining metal, about a foot in length from edge to edge. The bottom edge was evidently as sharp as that of a knife. It seemed big, heavy, and hung from a heavy metal stick, and it whispered as it swung through the air. I could no longer doubt the death prepared for me. Having failed to fall into the pit, there was a different death waiting for me. There were long, long hours of horror, during which the metal pendulum moved stealthily down, inch by inch. Days passed before it swept so closely over me I could smell it. The smell of the sharp metal pushed itself into my nose, and I prayed for its more rapid fall. I grew mad, and then I fell suddenly calm and lay smiling at the shining death like a child looking at some special toy. Chapter 3. The end is close. I passed out again, and upon my recovery I felt very sick and weak. Even so, I was still hungry, and with painful effort I stretched out my left arm as far as my ties allowed and took the small piece of meat that had been left by the rats. As I put it into my mouth, I had a half-formed idea of hope. I saw that the knife was designed to cross the area of the heart. It would cut the cloth of my robe. The deadly weight had a terrifically wide sweep, some 30 feet or more, and the power of its drop was enough to break these very walls of iron. I realized, however, that the cutting of my robe was all that would happen for several minutes. Little by little, down it came, until it shook within 3 inches of my chest. I fought violently to free my left arm, but down still it came down. My eyes followed its upward paths, and I saw that some 10 or 12 swings would bring the metal in contact with my robe. Suddenly, the idea came to me that the tie which held me was unusual. The first touch of the sharp knife on any part of the tie would cut it so that it might be unwound by my left hand. Was it likely that the tie crossed my chest in the path of the weight? Frightened to find my last hope lost, I lifted my head and looked at my chest to see that the tie wound around my arms, legs, and body closely in all areas, save in the path of the destroying knife. For many hours, the immediate area of the frame upon which I lay had been overrun with rats. They were wild and hungry, their red eyes fixed upon me. They had eaten all but one small piece of the food in the dish. I carefully rubbed the tie wherever I could reach it with the piece of the salty and oily meat that was left, and then I lay still and breathless. At first the hungry animals drew back, but this was only for a moment. I had not been wrong about their greed. Seeing that I remained still, one or two of the bravest rats jumped upon the frame and smelt the tie. This seemed the sign for an overall rush. They hurried from the well in great numbers. They jumped in hundreds upon me. They busied themselves with the oily tie. They pressed upon me in ever bigger numbers. Plainly I felt the relaxing of the tie, so I knew that in more than one place it must be already cut. I wasn't wrong, and the greedy rats chewed the tie loose, so that soon I felt that I was free. The tie hung in pieces from my body, but the sweep of the weight already pressed upon my chest, and it had cut the cloth of the robe. Twice again it swung, and a sharp pain shot through every nerve in my body. Luckily, the moment of escape had arrived. At a wave of my hand, the rats hurried quickly away, and with a calm movement I slid from the hold of the tie and beyond the reach of the knife. For the moment at least, I was free. Free, and in the hold of the Inquisition. I had just stepped from my bed of horror upon the stone floor of the prison when the movement of the horrible machine stopped, and it was drawn up through the ceiling. This was a lesson which I took very much to heart. It meant that my every movement was certainly being watched, and with that idea I looked nervously around the walls of iron that kept me in. Something strange had taken place in the apartment. During this time, I realized that the yellow light which lit up the cell came from a break about half an inch wide and around the cell at the base of the walls, which were completely separated from the floor. I tried to look through the hole. As I stood up from the floor, evil eyes looked angrily at me where none had appeared before. There came to my nose the smell of heated iron. I fought for breath. There could be no doubt of the design of my jailers. I pulled away from the burning metal to the center of the cell. The idea of the coolness of the well came over me, and I rushed to its deadly edge and looked down. The brightness from the burning roof lit up its distant corners. The heat quickly increased, and once again I looked up. Where the room had been square, I saw that it had now changed shape. The fearful difference quickly increased with a low groaning sound, and in an instant the apartment had changed its shape into that of a diamond. But the change did not stop here. The diamond quickly grew flatter with a speed that left me no time for thought. Its center and its greatest width came just over the yawning hole, so I pulled back. But the closing walls pressed me onward. At length there was no longer an inch of foothold on the firm floor of the prison for my burnt and turning body. I fought no more, but the pain of my spirit let out one loud, long, and final scream of hopelessness. I felt that I shook upon the edge. I turned away my eyes, and there was a sound of human voices. There was a loud beat as of many trumpets, a deafening noise as of many thunders, and the fiery walls rushed back. An arm caught my own as I fell into the hole. It was that of General LaSalle. The French army had entered Toledo. The Inquisition was in the hands of its enemies. The Stolen Letter. Chapter 1. The Captain Arrives. In Paris, one windy evening in the autumn of 18, I was enjoying a quiet time and a pipe with my friend, C. Auguste Dupin. We were in his library at number 33 Dunot Street, Faubourg Saint-Germain. We had been silent for an hour, and I was thinking of matters we had talked about earlier in the evening. One of the things we talked of was the murder of Marie Roget, and for this reason it was surprising when the door opened and our old friend, Mr. G, the captain of the Parisian police, came in. We gave him a warm welcome, as we had not seen him for several years. G had called to ask my friend's opinion about some official business that had caused much trouble. Dupin stood to light a lamp, but then sat down again without doing so, saying, "If it is something we need to think about carefully, it will be better to do so in the dark." Dupin gave his visitor a pipe and a comfortable chair. "And what is the problem now?" I asked. "Nothing more about murder, I hope?" "Oh, no, it is a very simple matter, and I have no doubt that we can run with it ourselves. I just thought the Dupin would like to hear the facts because it is so very strange." "Simple, yet strange," said Dupin. "Why, yes and no. We have been very confused because the matter is so simple, and yet we do not understand it at all." "Perhaps it is because it is so simple you do not understand," said my friend. "What silly things you say," replied the captain, laughing. "Perhaps the mystery is a little too plain," said Dupin. "Oh, goodness! Who ever heard of such an idea?" "And what is the matter on hand?" I asked. "Before I start," replied the captain, as he smoked and sat comfortably in his chair, "let me state that this is a great secret and that I could lose my job if it becomes known that I told anyone. No one must know that I have come here tonight. I have received secret information that an important letter has been stolen from the palace. We know who stole it. He was seen, and we also know he still has it." "How do you know?" asked Dupin. "It is clear," replied the captain, "from the content of the letter, and what would have happened if the thief had used it as he planned to." "Be a little clearer," I said. "The letter gives its holder control in a certain area where such control is very valuable." "Still, I do not quite understand," said Dupin. "You are speaking in riddles. Please explain so that I can understand." "If the letter were given to someone else, whom I will not name, the good name of a very important person would be at risk. This would give the thief a hold over the other." "But," I cut in, "the thief would need to know that person who lost the letter, knows who he is. Who would dare?" "Is it the Minister D?" asked G, "who dares all things, those that are proper as well as those that are not. The way it was done was as clever as it was daring. The person who was robbed was alone in the bedroom when the letter came. She was reading it when her husband, from whom she wished to hide it, came into the room. After a quick try to put it in a drawer, she had to put it upon a table. As the address was on top and the content could not be seen, the letter was not noticed. Then the Minister D entered, and his sharp eye immediately noticed the paper. He recognized the handwriting and observed that the person to whom it was addressed was upset. He is a very clever man, and thus he understood her secret. After some business matters were hurried through, he took out a letter somewhat similar to the one in question, opened it and pretended to read it, and then placed it close to the other. He continued to talk for a quarter of an hour about public matters, but when he left, he took the other letter from the table. Its real owner saw, but of course did not dare call attention to the act in the presence of her husband, who stood beside her. She had no choice but to let the minister leave quietly, so the minister departed, leaving his own unimportant letter on the table. "So," said Dupin to me, "the thief has exactly what he needs to make his hold complete, because he knows that the person who owns the letter knows he has stolen it." "Yes," replied the captain, "and that hold has been used for some months for political purposes to a very dangerous degree. The person who was robbed is more certain every day that she needs to get her letter back, but this cannot be done openly. Driven to lose hope, she has asked my help." "I imagine," said Dupin, "no cleverer agent could be asked for." Chapter 2. The Story is Told. "It is clear," I said, "the minister still has the letter as it gives him hold over the owner. Once it is used, that hold is gone. True, said G, and that is why I went on. I first made a careful search of the minister's hotel, and here my chief problem was in searching without his finding out. I have been given strong advice of the danger to us if he finds out. But I said, you are quite at home in these investigations. The Parisian police have done this often before. Oh yes, and for this reason I did not lose hope. The practices of the minister gave me a great advantage, as he is often away from home all night and has few servants. They sleep away from their masters' rooms and often drink too much. I have keys that will open any room or cupboard in Paris. I have spent most of every night for the last 3 months in a search of the D Hotel. I am interested, and the reward is very large, so I did not give up until I realized the thief is cleverer than I am. I believe I have investigated every possible hiding place in the hotel. But is it not possible, I suggested, that although the minister may have the letter, he may have hidden it in a different place? It is not likely, said Dupin. The politics at court in which D is caught up means the fact the letter could be produced at a moment's notice is nearly as important as holding it. True, I said. The paper is clearly in the hotel. As for its being upon the person of the minister, we may consider that out of the question. Completely, said the captain. He has been stopped twice, as if by robbers, and he has been searched with great care under my own eyes. You need not have taken the trouble, said Dupin. I suppose D is not a simple person and would expect to be stopped. No, he is not a simple person, said G, but then he's a poet, which is only one step away from a simple person. True, said Dupin, although I have written poetry myself. Suppose you tell us about your search, I said. We searched everywhere. I have done this often. I took the building room by room, a whole week to each. We examined the furniture of each room. We opened every possible drawer. After the cupboards, we took the chairs. The seats we explored, with the fine long needles you have seen me use. We took the tops from the tables. Why? Sometimes the person who wants to hide an article takes the top from a table. The leg is dug out, the article is put in the hole, and the top is put back. The bottoms and tops of bedposts are used in the same way. But could not the hole be discovered by knocking? I asked. Not if enough cotton filling was put around it. Anyway, we had to do it without noise. But you could not have taken to pieces all articles of furniture where something could have been hidden. A letter may be packed into a thin roll, similar to a large needle, and put into the crosspiece of a chair. You did not take to pieces all the chairs. Indeed not. We examined the way every piece of furniture was made by the use of a very strong microscope. We would have found any changes immediately. A single small piece of wood dust would have been very easy to see. I take it you looked at the mirrors, between the boards and the glass, and that you checked out the beds and the bedclothes, as well as the curtains and carpets. Of course, and when we had completed every piece of the furniture, we examined the house itself. We divided it into areas, and then we searched each inch throughout, including the houses on either side with the microscope. The houses on either side, I cried. You must have gone to a lot of trouble. Yes, but the reward offered is huge. You included the grounds around the houses? Yes, we did, and found nothing. You looked among D's papers, of course, and into the books of the library. Certainly, we opened every parcel, we opened every book, and turned over every page in each one. We measured how thick every book cover was and looked at each with a microscope. Had any of them been touched lately, it would have been impossible to hide. Around 5 new books we checked with the needles. You explored the floors under the carpets. We took up every carpet and examined the boards with the microscope. And the paper on the walls. Yes. You looked under the house? We did. Then, I said, you have been making a mistake, and the letter is not in the hotel as you suppose. I think you are right, said the captain. And now, Dupin, what advice would you give me? To make a complete search of the hotel again. That is not necessary, replied G. I am sure the letter is not at the hotel. I have no better advice to give you, said Dupin. Do you have, of course, an exact description of the letter? Oh yes, the captain produced a notebook and carefully described the inside and outside of the missing letter. Soon after reading this, he left, looking sadder than I had ever seen him. Chapter 3. The Captain Asks for Help. About a month later, the captain visited us again and found us much as before. He took a pipe and a chair and started a conversation. At length I said, "Well, G, what of the stolen letter? I suppose you have finally decided there is no getting the better of the minister?" "Yes, I have searched again as Dupin suggested, but it was all for nothing, as I knew it would be." "How much was the reward offered for the return of the letter, did you say?" asked Dupin. "Why, a very great deal. I do not like to give an exact amount, but I would not mind giving my own check for 50,000 francs to anyone who could get me that letter. It is becoming more and more important every day, and the reward is now doubled. Even if it were 3 times that amount, I could not do more than I have." "I really think, G," said Dupin, "you have not done your best. You might do a little more, I think." "How? In what way?" "Why, you might take advice in the matter." "I am quite happy to take advice and to pay for it. I really would give 50,000 francs to anyone who would help me." "In that case," replied Dupin, producing a checkbook, "you may as well write a check for the amount you state. When you have put your name to it, I will hand you the letter." I was surprised. The captain appeared extremely bowled over, and for some minutes he remained without words. He took a pen, filled it, and put his name to a check for 50,000 francs. He handed it to Dupin, who examined it carefully and put it in his wallet. He then took a letter from a desk and gave it to the captain. The man took hold of it with great joy and opened it with a shaking hand. He looked quickly at the contents, then hurried from the room and the house without having spoken a word since Dupin had asked him to write the check. When he had gone, my friend explained. "The Parisian police," he said, "are very bright in their way. They are single-minded, clever, have great skill, and are very well trained." Thus, when G told us of the way he searched the Hotel D, I felt sure he had done well so far as he went. The measures used were not only the best of their kind, but carried out without fault. Had the letter been within the area of their search, they would have found it. The measures, he continued, were good, and they were well carried out. Their fault was being out of place for the case and for the man. The captain has a very strong set of rules by which he makes his plans, but he is always too deep or too shallow for the matter in hand. Many a schoolboy can reason better than he. I knew one about 8 years of age who was very successful in the game of even and uneven numbers, which is a simple game played with marbles. One player holds in his hand a number of these toys and asks another whether that number is even or uneven. If the guesser is right, he wins 1 marble. If wrong, he loses 1. The boy I speak of won all the marbles of the school. Of course, he had some rule he used, and this was a simple study of how clever the other boys were. Now, the reasoning the schoolboy used, what is it? It is simply, I said, the boy thinking like the other boy. And thinking like the other boy, I said, hangs on how intelligent the reasoner judges the other to be. That is right, replied Dupin, and the captain and his men fail so often because they do not find this out, and they only consider the way in which they think and not how the other person thinks. They look only where they would hide something. When the way of the particular criminal is different from their own, the criminal gets the better of them. They do not change their ways. At best, when there is some very special reward, they stretch their old ways but do not change their beliefs. They make holes, push needles, knock and listen. Look with the microscope and divide up the area of the building. What is it all but overuse of one way of searching? Using one set of ideas the captain has been using for a long time. He thinks all men would hide a letter where he would hide it, but such favorite hiding places are used only by ordinary people. In hiding the article in this way, discovery counts on the simple care, patience, and strength of mind of those looking, and not on skill. Where the case is important, or when the reward is big enough, The activities in question have never been wrong. Had the stolen letter been hidden anywhere within the area searched by the captain, it would have been found. This officer, however, has been completely mixed up because of his belief that the minister is stupid. He is known as a poet, and the captain supposes all poets are stupid. But is this really the poet, I asked? There are two brothers. I know, and both are known as men of letters. He is a man of math and no poet. You are wrong. I know him well, he is both. As a poet and a man of math, he would reason well. As just a man of math, he could not have reasoned at all, and would have been under the thumb of the captain. You will not deny the well-accepted idea of centuries that reason based on math has long been seen as reasoning without equal. You can be sure, replied Dupin, that every popular common belief is stupid because it calls to the greatest number of people. The men of math have done their best to make popular the mistake of which you speak, but it is still wrong. I mean, continued Dupin, if the minister had been no more than a man of math, the captain would not have needed to give me this check. I know him as both man of math and poet, and acted in light of that. I know him as one of the king's men and as a politician. He must know the ordinary police ways, so he must have thought it likely he would be stopped. He must have expected secret searching of his home. The fact that he was often away from home at night I saw only as a way to let the police make a careful search. Therefore, the sooner they did this and did not find the letter, the sooner they would think that it was not in the hotel. He would certainly see that the most difficult corner of his hotel would be open to the searches of the captain. He would be driven to something simple. You may remember how greatly the captain laughed when I said that possibly this mystery troubled him so much because it was so very plain. The street nameplates with very large letters are not seen because they are so evident. This failure to notice is exactly the same as the way the mind does not notice those things of good and bad which are too strongly evident. But it appears the captain does not understand this. He never believed it likely that the minister had put the letter right under the nose of the whole world so that no one would see it. Chapter 4. Dupin Works It Out. But the more I thought that the letter must always have been at hand, the more certain I became that the minister had not tried to hide it at all. So I put on a pair of green glasses and called at the ministerial hotel. I found D at home being lazy as usual and pretending to be bored. I complained about my weak eyes and cried about needing glasses. Under their cover, I carefully studied the room, while I seemed to be listening to him. I paid special attention to a large writing table near him. On it, there lay a mix of letters and other papers. I looked hard, but I saw nothing to make me think the letter was there. At last, I saw a cheap card holder, hanging from a little metal hook just above the fireplace. In it were 5 or so visiting cards and 1 letter. The letter was dirty and lined, almost in 2 pieces. It had a large black stamp, bearing the letter D very clearly, and was addressed in a small female hand to D, the minister himself. It was pushed carelessly into the top of the holder. When I looked, I realized it was the letter I was searching for. It was certainly very different from the one the captain had described to us with such care. Here the stamp was large and black, with the D letter stamped on it. What the captain had described was a small red stamp, with the arms of the S family. Here the address to the minister was small and womanly. In the one the captain spoke of, the address to a certain queenly person was very strong and decided. The number of differences was extreme. The dirt and the torn condition of the paper was also something I found very different from D's usually careful habits. It seemed he wanted anyone who saw it to believe the letter was worth nothing. That the letter was in full view of any visitor was in agreement with what I already decided. I stayed as long as possible and kept up conversation with the minister. We talked about something I knew was interesting and exciting to him, but all that time I kept my mind on the letter. I remembered its outside appearance and arrangement in the card holder. It seemed clear to me that the letter had been turned inside out like a glove, readdressed, and stuck down again. I said good morning to the minister and departed, leaving a gold cigarette box upon the table. The next morning I called for the cigarette box. The minister and I kept on with the conversation of the day before. Suddenly, we heard a loud sound like a gun going off under the hotel windows. There were a number of terrible screams and the shots of a frightened crowd, so D opened a window and looked out. While he was at the window, I stepped to the card holder and took the letter. I put it in my pocket and put back a copy I had carefully prepared. On it I had copied the D stamp easily, using bread. The trouble in the street had been caused by the nervous activity of a man with a gun. Luckily the gun had no ball, and the man went his way as a madman or a drunk. When he had gone, D came from the window, where I had followed him immediately after I had taken the letter. Soon after that, I said goodbye to him. The pretended madman was a man in my own pay. "But why did you," I asked, "put back a copy of the letter? Why did you not take it openly at the first visit and leave?" "D," replied Dupin, "is a worried man and a brave one. His hotel has staff who will look after him. Had I done what you say, I might never have left him alive. But I had another object. You know my political beliefs. I act as a fan of the woman in question. For a year and a half, the minister has had her under his hold, but she has him now in hers. Since he does not know he no longer has the letter, he will carry on as if it was, and will certainly go to his political downfall, which will be uncomfortable rather than speedy. I have no pity for him, for he is an intelligent but dishonest man. However, I should like to know what he thinks when a certain person refuses his orders, and he opens the letter I left for him in the card holder. Why? Did you put anything particular in it? It did not seem right to leave it empty. That would have been rude. D once did me a bad turn, which I told him in a joking way I should remember. I knew he would be curious about the person who had got the better of him, and I thought it a pity not to give him any evidence of who it was. He is familiar with my writing, and I just copied into the middle of the empty paper the words, "Such a deadly plan, if not worthy of one bad brother, is worthy of the other." Playlet, The Facts in the Case of Mr. Valdemar. Based on the story by Edgar Allan Poe. Mr. Valdemar has previously given his agreement to Mr. Payne to being hypnotized at the moment he is approaching death. Mr. Payne arrives at Mr. Valdemar's house just before 8 o'clock in the evening to begin the experiment.
Mr. Valdemar, I want you to confirm that you have agreed to let me hypnotize you as your moment of death approaches. Is that correct?
Yes, I wish to be hypnotized. But I fear you have left it for too long.
Let's hope not. Let me introduce Mr. Lowell. I have asked him to take notes of all that happens once I start to hypnotize you. Do you agree?
Yes, but you must hurry. It is not long now. You must hurry.
As I pass my hand across your forehead, just breathe deeply. That's it. Breathe deeply, deeper and deeper. Just feel my hand passing across your forehead. Breathe deeply.
Doctors Dean and Francis arrive at 10 o'clock as previously arranged.
Dr. Dean, Dr. Francis, good. You are on time. I'm going to hypnotize him now. Do you agree that his death will happen any moment, and this is the time to go ahead with the experiment?
Yes, he is already very close to dying.
It will happen very quickly now.
Mr. Valdemar, as I keep stroking your forehead, you will start to fall deeply asleep. Your heartbeat will become very weak. That's it. Deeply asleep. Deeply asleep. Deeply asleep. Well, gentlemen, do you agree that he is in a perfect state of hypnotic sleep?
He most certainly is, deeper than I have seen before. I think I should stay with him all night.
I agree that he is in a deep hypnotic sleep. I'll leave him in your care and come back at dawn.
Mr. Valdemar is left in peace until about 3 o'clock in the morning.
Now, Mr. Valdemar, I want you to follow my arm, as it passes above you, with your own right arm. That's right. Just follow my arm with your own. That's right. Just follow as my arm passes over you. Mr. Valdemar, are you asleep?
Yes, asleep now. Do not wake me up. Let me die now.
Do you still have a pain in your chest, Mr. Valdemar?
No pain. I am dying. Dying.
Just sleep. Sleep deeply.
Dr. Francis arrives just before dawn.
Ah, Dr. Francis, I see you are surprised to find Mr. Valdemar still alive.
I am very surprised indeed. Can you wake him?
Mr. Valdemar, are you still asleep?
Yes, still asleep. Dying.
Mr. Payne, I don't think we should disturb him any more. Let's leave him in peace until death takes place naturally. I'm sure that will be no more than a few minutes. What do you think, Dr. Dean?
Yes, he is indeed very close to death. Leave him in peace. Let him die naturally.
Mr. Valdemar, are you still asleep?
Yes? No, I have been sleeping. And now I am dead.
This is too horrible. Too horrible. I can't bear it. Never have I seen anything so horrible. I think I'm going to faint.
Mr. Payne, the two doctors, and Mr. Lowell leave the house, with Mr. Valdemar in the care of two new nurses. They return the next afternoon.
Good afternoon, nurse. Has anything changed while we've been gone? Has he moved at all? Has he spoken?
No, sir, nothing at all. He just lies there like you see him now, totally calm and peaceful.
Gentlemen, what do you think we should do? Do you think the time has come when we should wake him up?
No, his death has been arrested by the hypnotism. If we wake him up now, it will ensure his rapid, not to say instant, death. What do you think, Dr. Francis?
We should let him be. You are quite right, Dr. Dean. If we wake him up now, it will cause death very quickly.
Very well. Let's leave him to the nurses for now.
Mr. Payne and Mr. Lowell continue to visit the house every day. After 7 months, they return with Doctors Francis and Dean.
Good day, nurse. How has he been? Have there been signs of waking up?
No, sir. He has been as peaceful as ever. Not a sound, not a movement, nothing at all.
Doctors, I really do think the time has come when we should try to wake him up. It's been 7 months now since I hypnotized him. How long can we leave him in this state?
I think you're right. How will you do it?
I will stroke his forehead, as I did before, and see whether that wakes him up.
See, his eye is opening. I can see the pupil. But what's that yellow liquid pouring out from under the eyelids?
What a terrible smell! It's awful! Awful!
Perhaps you can get his arm to follow yours as you did before. No, I see that's not working.
Mr. Payne, can you ask Mr. Valdemar a question?
Certainly, Doctor. Mr. Valdemar, can you explain to us what you want us to do now?
In the name of God, quick, put me to sleep. Quick, wake me up. Quick, I say that I am dead.
Mr. Valdemar, wake up. You are now awake. Wake up, wake up.
I tell you I am dead. Dead in the name of God. Quick, I am dead.
Where is he gone? Look, he's gone. All that's left is that disgusting mess on the bed. That horrible liquid. He has turned to liquid mass of disgusting matter.